Hello, and how are you feeling? Welcome to episode 7 of Coaching from Not a Blue Tree with me, Gary Burns. This episode is all about the power of timeline therapy, a process for resolving negative emotions and limiting beliefs. So, timeline therapy is a process which we use to resolve negative emotions from the past which are affecting the present, and to release limiting beliefs which are preventing us from becoming and being the people we want to be. Part of the coaching process is about understanding your reality of now and establishing what the barriers are to your success. Everyone is different, and everyone's reality is unique to them, even if there are recurring similarities and themes. The same applies to barriers, and it's very clear to me that what may be a minor hindrance to one can be an almost insurmountable obstacle to another. It's crucial, therefore, that we work out what the reality and barriers are for you and what they mean for your progress and success. The power of unresolved negative emotions from the past and limiting beliefs which we can adopt at any time are, though, significant and recurring barriers to success. Thinking firstly about the negative emotions, if emotions from past events remain unresolved, this can stop us seeing opportunities. It can prevent us from considering options. Indeed, it can lead us into adopting avoidance strategies simply because we don't want to experience the same level of intense emotion again. We can become consumed by the emotion to the point that we only have to encounter a situation with minimal similarities to the event which caused us such a major emotional reaction, that we are once more back in the moment, revisiting and reliving the event, adding layers and building on the emotional response. The memory takes over, and the opportunity for something different passes us by. The route to something better is closed, and we are once more shut down by the memory and the unresolved emotion. And just think about it for a moment. How many events from your past, when you think about them now, reconnect you with the powerful negative emotions that you experienced at the time? How many times when you revisit those memories have you thought that you can't let go, you can't forgive, you can't move on, you can't forget? Because it was so terrible, they were so terrible, the results and consequences were so terrible that you cannot let them off the hook. They can't get away with it. And in what is the biggest contradiction of them all, by holding on and reliving it, you are keeping yourself safe because you're keeping the memory alive. And now breathe. And think back to the time that you laughed so hard that it hurt. Remember that amazing day you had with friends or family. Reflect on that time when you felt happy. With regards to limiting beliefs, we can adopt and install them at any time. From those thoughts of not being good at maths, not being able to learn a new skill, not being sporty or arty, to deep-seated beliefs of not being good enough, worthy enough, deserving enough. For some, it's the fear of failure and what others might say. For others, it's a firm belief of being stupid or unlovable. Whatever the belief is, it holds us back. It prevents us from seeing choices and opportunities. Our limiting beliefs limit and reduce us. They limit and reduce our world, and they limit and reduce the now and the future that we could in fact have if only we let go of and see beyond the limiting belief. And how many times have you accepted second best because of how you have berated yourself, how you have accepted your lack of choices and options, because of how you've dismissed yourself? What have you told yourself about you when things turn out differently from how you want? When you see or hear of others doing what secretly you'd like to be doing? When you're overlooked or passed by for an opportunity with others seemingly moving forward, onwards and upwards, while you remain firmly stuck with your little lot? And now breathe. And think back to that time when you laughed so hard that it hurt. Remember that amazing day you had with friends or family. Reflect on that time when you felt happy. Remember what is important to you now. So, thinking about our desire for success, whatever that looks like for you, and how this can be affected by unresolved negative emotions from the past, and limiting beliefs which we have adopted at any time in the past, if we can resolve the negative emotions in a way which allows us to remember the event and to take learnings which allow us to more effectively manage the emotion in the future, if we can release the limiting belief in a way which replaces it with an empowering belief which enables us to see opportunities and options, how helpful would that be? Suddenly, those thoughts and ideas which we previously dismissed as not possible, not for us, not for people like us, or which we'd not even been aware of, become possibilities and choices, routes to the now and the future that we want. And we've resolved it all in a way which works with how our unconscious mind wants to resolve it. Indeed, we do it in a way which is exactly what the unconscious mind has wanted to do all along, and which we have unintentionally but consciously thwarted by reliving and revisiting those painful memories. While the process for resolving negative emotions from the past and releasing limiting beliefs is almost identical, both relying on timeline therapy with minimal tweaks in the process, I think it helps to explore negative emotions and limiting beliefs separately, as there are different internal processes in play. So, starting with negative emotions, I think it's worth exploring what goes on when we process emotions. We go through life experiencing events which we experience through our five senses and our thoughts. As we experience events, we have an emotional response, which may be one of the big, powerful emotions, both positive and negatives, or it may be some of the less powerful emotions. There is, though, always some form of emotional response. Our unconscious mind takes the event and the emotion, runs both through a number of filters, and then stores them separately. And this is an important point. Rather than storing the whole bundle, event and emotion together, they're separated out. This, I'll be honest, felt a bit weird when I first thought about it. However, it really does make sense. And think about it for a moment. Our emotional response to any given moment is spontaneous. If something is sad, we cry. If something is funny, we laugh. We don't sit there considering each event and how to respond emotionally. We simply have the emotional response. However, once the moment has passed, our emotional reaction to the memory may be very different. Something which felt incredibly funny in the moment may barely raise a smile when we think back to that moment. Something which brought us to tears when it was actually happening may no longer make us even sad. I know people who have experienced extreme fear in the moment and emotion replaced with anger when they reflect on how they were put in that fear-inducing situation. Our emotional memory is therefore fluid, affected and changed by subsequent events and experiences. To have the memories of the events and emotions tied together would therefore generate conflict in itself, potentially impacting on our ability to review what happened and how we feel about it. With those significant emotional events, rather than allowing the unconscious mind to separate out the event and the emotions, storing them away in the way that it does for everything else, we revisit and relive them, reviving our emotional response. And we can do this at any time. It may be in response to similar events. It's possible that it's the result of a similar emotional response with a completely unrelated event. The similarities may be real or imagined. The link or similarities between what happened before and what's happening now may be significant, or it may be extremely tenuous. It is more than possible that it has reached the point where you are not seeing or becoming aware of situations, your unconscious mind shutting out opportunities and avenues to explore, wishing to protect you from further angst and a return trip to those emotional events which you are so good at reliving and re-experiencing. And this is where the negative emotions from the past begin to hold you back, omitting from your awareness of anything that you could use to link back to those painful memories and awaken them once more. The events which lead to limiting beliefs are somewhat different. An event leads to the limiting decision, the point where we decide that the belief is true and applies to us. This leads to the limiting belief. So, for example, something happens that makes me think I'm stupid. If I take this as true about me, the decision is made. I have decided, and the belief that I'm stupid takes hold, becoming the limiting belief. And what follows is a process of reinforcement. If I believe that I am stupid, this will limit my potential. I will simply rule myself, consciously or unconsciously, out of opportunities and options because I believe that I am stupid. The amount of action that I take is therefore reduced, which in turn gives me limited results. Those limited results reinforce my belief that I am stupid, and the cycle repeats. Once more, this is where the limiting belief begins to hold you back, omitting from your awareness anything that you don't believe is possible or for you because of the limiting belief. And let's be very clear about this. Both processes tend to be unconscious. It can be the slightest thing that triggers the process that either stops us from resolving the emotion or adopting the limiting belief. Indeed, with limiting beliefs, it can be something quite minor, a throwaway comment that we take to heart, and which, in another moment, we may have quickly dismissed. What is clear with both unresolved negative emotions and limiting beliefs is that they are both very pervasive, impacting our thoughts and actions, shutting out and down options and choices, obscuring opportunities, and making our worlds ever smaller. And all too often we don't realise how much we've actually missed until we resolve the negative emotions and release the limiting belief. So, how does timeline therapy work? It's one of those questions that people often ask, frequently fearful of having to explore those painful memories and relive the negative experience or unravel the limiting belief. And this is where timeline therapy is very different. It's not interested in those significant events which you can very clearly remember and revisit. Indeed, the process is not interested in any event. Instead, the process works with the emotion, taking you to a point where you cannot consciously work with any event, meaning that you have to work with the emotion, which of course comes from the unconscious. And the only way to successfully complete the process is to trust your unconscious mind throughout. And the next frequently asked question is, how do I know that I'm working with my unconscious mind? It's a good question, a very good question. So, I'm not going to explain the timeline therapy process in this podcast. To be honest, it would firstly take too long, and secondly, it works best if you do the process without too much explanation. The more explanation you have, the more likely you are to rely on your conscious mind, which, with this process, is the opposite of what we want. So, going back to the question of how do you know if you're working with your unconscious mind? One of the questions you're asked towards the beginning of the process is if you are okay to let go of the negative emotion or the limiting belief and to be aware of it consciously. Now, the question wants you to establish if you're okay to run the process, release the negative emotion or the limiting belief, and then be aware of the result consciously. That's to say, to be aware that the negative emotion or the limiting belief is gone. If you were to answer this question with your conscious mind, you would sit there for several minutes, possibly longer, having an internal debate about the pros and cons of letting go, thinking about the advantages and the disadvantages. You would try to steer your mind to events where you've experienced the negative emotion or been affected by the limiting belief. You would start to focus on the event and then do what you do best, relive the event and re-experience the emotion, or contemplate the veracity of the limiting belief. You would be back to square one. If, however, when I ask you if it's okay to let go of the negative emotion or the limiting belief and to be aware of it consciously, and you immediately say that it is or it isn't or you're not sure, you're working with your unconscious mind. In other words, if you know that you have three choices, yes it is, no it isn't, or not sure, and you go with the first answer that comes to mind, this is your unconscious mind giving you an answer. And people then say, well, it feels like guessing, which of course is possible. And if it is a guess, where's it coming from? It's all coming from your mind. And maybe, just maybe, this is your unconscious mind understanding the process before you do so consciously and giving you the answer that it believes is what you can handle. How's that for a thought? And timeline therapy relies on your unconscious mind throughout. And if you're willing to trust your unconscious mind, answer the questions without thought, with your first reaction. If you're willing to follow instructions without question and simply trust the process, you get a great result. And at this point, people usually start wondering, how on earth can this process possibly work? And it works for a number of reasons. Firstly, we're not dealing with events which may have no feasible resolution. We're dealing with emotions which we know that we can always resolve, because that's what our unconscious mind does and wants to do all of the time. Secondly, it's done content-free, which means that you do not have to explain or share anything. It's all done in your head. Thirdly, we're addressing the emotion because if we resolve the emotion, we can see the significant event more clearly, unhindered by reliving and revisiting the emotion. After all, how many sensible conversations have you had with someone who is ranting in rage, crying their eyes out, or gripped by overwhelming fear? Exactly. So, how can you have those conversations with yourself when you're in the midst of an emotional crisis? Finally, the impact affects all future events, allowing you to experience emotions when it's right and appropriate for you to do so, and giving you an understanding that allows you to resolve the emotion before you can take it into the future and affect your future choices. Similarly, you can release a limiting decision, a limiting belief, and be more aware for the future. So, what negative emotions are holding you back? Which of the big five, anger, sadness, fear, hurt, and guilt, or their variations, are stopping you from being who you want to be? What are the limiting beliefs that impede the now and the future that you want for yourself? And now just imagine a now and a future where you have resolved the negative emotions and released the limiting beliefs. Just think about all the options and opportunities that are now in your awareness. Consider all of the choices that you now see. And how amazing is that? You now have significant information which can help you to resolve those negative emotions and release any limiting beliefs that you have. You can now focus on the changes that you know that you can make, moving forwards to the new model of the world that you want for yourself and those around you. If you can do it now. If you're not sure or need some help, you can always book an initial consultation on my website, notabluetree.com, and you then work out what the next step is. And you know that it makes sense, don't you?